Welcome to this bonus episode of Diplomacy and International Relations. This is a podcast focused on international relations, global politics, and Danish political developments. I'm really glad you're joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. We've got a really fascinating analysis lined up for you.
We really do. And before we jump into the material, I just want to encourage you to follow and subscribe to the podcast on whatever app you're using right now. Also, you can support the show on Patreon. If you do, you'll gain access to bonus episodes, plus our weekly and monthly briefings specifically on Danish politics. You can find the link right down in the description.
Right, and the support really helps us keep these briefings comprehensive and, highly analytical. Because today's topic is, well, it's not a casual chat, it's a complex geopolitical briefing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are looking at a situation that is unfolding in, honestly, one of the most remote, icy expanses on Earth. We're talking about Greenland. And if you've been following global security trends, you might have noticed that this massive island, which has a population of just over 56,000 people, has quietly become the absolute most strategically contested piece of territory in the Northern Hemisphere.
It really has. I mean, from multi-billion-dollar lawsuits over rare earth minerals to direct geopolitical maneuvering by the U.S., China, and Russia, this is a tiny population finding itself at the exact center of the global green energy transition and international security.
Yeah, it's wild. To even understand why these major powers are suddenly tripping over themselves to get to Greenland, we really have to start with the map. We need to look at the strategic geography because before we even get to the minerals under the ice, the location itself is invaluable.
Right. And to set the stage, we should quickly clarify Greenland's political status because it's a bit unique.
Yeah, it's a hybrid system, right?
Exactly. It's a self-governing representative democracy, but it sits within the Kingdom of Denmark. So, headed by King Frederick X. The 56,542 residents there, they have their own parliament, they control domestic affairs, healthcare, and crucially, their natural resources.
But they don't control everything.
No, Copenhagen still controls foreign policy, defense, and security, which, as we'll see, creates a ton of friction.
I can imagine. So you have this huge landmass, tiny population, relying on Denmark for defense. But from a military standpoint, why is the Pentagon so obsessed with this island?
It's all about a maritime choke point known as the GIUK gap. That's Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom.
Okay, so just looking at the globe from the top down.
Right. If you're a Russian nuclear submarine based out of the Kola Peninsula and you want to get into the open North Atlantic to, threaten the U.S. coast or European shipping, you physically have to pass through that gap.
You literally have to squeeze between those islands.
Exactly. And Greenland forms this massive, immovable western pillar of that gateway. It's a foundational requirement for NATO to monitor that water.
Wow. And it's not just the water, right? Because there's also the airspace. I was reading the source material about the Pacific Space Base.
Yes, formerly known as the Thule Air Base.
Right. And this is the northernmost U.S. military installation in the world. It's way up on the northwest coast of Greenland. What are they actually doing up there?
They're watching the sky. Because of how far north it is, Pacific has this geometric advantage for early warning ballistic missile radars. If an ICBM is launched from Russia or China toward North America, the shortest path is right over the North Pole.
Because the Earth is a sphere, so it goes up and over, not across the ocean.
Exactly. The radars there can track those missiles the second they come over the horizon. Plus, it's a vital node for space domain awareness, so tracking satellites and space debris. That base is rooted in a 1951 defense agreement between the U.S. and Denmark.
Which kind of brings us to something that honestly felt like a bizarre joke a few years ago. In 2019, President Donald Trump famously offered to just buy Greenland.
Right, calling it a large real estate deal.
Yeah, and everyone laughed. But looking at the radar coverage and the GIUK gap, the strategic logic behind wanting to own it was actually completely serious, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the logic has been there for decades. President Harry Truman actually secretly offered Denmark $100 million in gold to buy the island back in 1946.
Wait, really? 1946?
Yeah, right after World War II. And the Danes said no then, just like they did in 2019.
The 2019 rejection was pretty explosive, too. The Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, called the idea absurd.
She did. And Trump ended up canceling a state visit and calling her comments nasty. It was a diplomatic disaster. But it really proved that the era of just ignoring the Arctic was completely over.
And those tensions have only escalated since. Fast forward to early 2026, and we saw European nations like actual NATO allies sending troops to the Arctic to show solidarity with Denmark.
Yeah, that was a massive signal. They were basically telling Washington, you can't just absorb Greenland into your security umbrella without European involvement.
Right. It got so intense that Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, had to step in at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
He did. He essentially had to broker a framework for negotiations between the U.S. and Denmark just to calm things down.
Which led to Denmark really opening their wallets, right? The 1.96 billion defense agreement.
Exactly. From 2024 to 2033, they're pouring almost 2 billion euros into surveillance, asserting sovereignty, and upgrading the Joint Arctic Command in Nuuk.
It's like, I think of it like a homeowner who has this really rugged, overgrown fence at the very back of their backyard. They've ignored it for years, and then one day they realize, oh wait, that fence is the only thing keeping out a group of dangerous intruders from the whole neighborhood. But why did it take the threat of Chinese and Russian expansion to make the West remember this fence?
Well, for a long time, there was this concept of Arctic exceptionalism. After the Cold War, the international community basically agreed to treat the Arctic as this peaceful, low-tension zone. Just science, environmental protection, no geopolitics.
A completely insulated bubble.
Yeah. But that era is officially over. And the main reason is climate change. The ice is melting rapidly, which literally removes the physical barrier to entry,
Right, exposing what's underneath.
exposing new shipping routes like China's Polar Silk Road, and more importantly, exposing raw materials.
Which is the perfect pivot to our second segment. Because while the geography is militarily vital, it's what is beneath the melting ice that has triggered this insane modern gold rush. We need to talk about the global rare earth element supply chain.
This is the core issue. Rare earth elements, or REs, are essentially the building blocks of both the green energy transition and advanced defense tech.
Things like permanent magnets, right?
Exactly. You need elements like neodymium and praseodymium for the motors in electric vehicles. You need dysprosium for offshore wind turbines so the magnets don't demagnetize. And you need them for F-35 fighter jets and precision missiles.
So they're completely essential, but where does China fit into this?
China dominates the entire market. Right now, they control about 60% of global rare earth mining. But the real choke point is processing. They control roughly 90% of the world's rare earth processing capacity.
90%. That is a terrifying monopoly. Why is processing so centralized?
Because separating these elements is incredibly difficult and environmentally toxic. They have very similar atomic structures. To separate them, you have to run the crushed rock through thousands of chemical solvent baths.
So it's not just melting it down like iron or copper.
No, not at all. It requires massive amounts of acids and produces millions of tons of toxic, often radioactive wastewater. The West essentially outsourced this pollution to China decades ago because it was cheaper and bypassed our strict environmental laws.
Wow. So we handed them the keys to the future economy just to keep our own backyards clean. And now everyone is looking at Greenland to fix this vulnerability.
Because Greenland is a geological treasure chest. The Geological Survey there found that the island contains 25 of the 34 critical minerals listed on the EU's critical raw materials list.
25 out of 34. That's massive. And the crown jewel of all this is a specific mountain in southern Greenland, right? The Kvanefjeld or Kvanefjeld project.
Kvanefjeld is legendary in the mining industry. It holds over 1 billion tons of JORC-compliant mineral resources.
And JORC compliant means it's proven, right? It's mathematically verified to exist.
Exactly. It's economically viable. Analysts projected this one single mine could supply up to 15% of the entire global demand for rare earths.
One mine, 15% of global supply. So obviously companies started throwing money at it. An Australian company, Energy Transition Minerals, or ETM, spent 15 years and over $150 million trying to develop it.
Yes, they did all the environmental and social impact studies. But here is the massive geopolitical paradox. The whole point for the West is to break China's monopoly.
Right. Strategic autonomy.
Exactly. But ETM, this Western company, had a Chinese partner. Sheng Resources, a massive Chinese processing firm, bought a 7% stake in ETM.
Wait, really?
Yeah. And they had an agreement to lead the processing of Kvanefjeld's minerals.
I mean, that is just completely ironic. We want to mine Greenland to escape China, but the company digging the hole was going to send the dirt right back to a Chinese company for processing.
Because the West simply lacks the processing infrastructure. ETM didn't have a choice financially. To process that much ore, you need the chemical infrastructure that currently only exists in China. So this Western alternative was tied right back to Beijing.
That completely undermines the strategic autonomy narrative, and it plays right into China's 2018 Arctic policy, where they controversially called themselves a near-Arctic state.
Which is geographically absurd, but it shows their intent to embed themselves in Arctic resources.
Okay, so you have Washington freaking out, Beijing quietly buying in, and an Australian company spending millions. But the reality on the ground was completely different because that mountain had a geological catch. It wasn't just rare earths.
No, it wasn't. And this
So,
is where the local politics explode. The mountain sits right next to a town called Narsak.
right.
Narsak is a small community, about 1,000 people. They are sheep farmers, fishermen, hunters. Their lives depend entirely on a pristine, unpolluted environment.
And this billion-ton mine is basically going to be an open pit right in their backyard. But what was the specific catch with the rocks?
The ore body contains uranium.
Uranium.
Yeah. Not as a primary target, but it's naturally occurring in the rock at concentrations of about 250 to 350 parts per million. You can't mine the rare earths without digging up the uranium.
And for a long time, Greenland had a zero-tolerance policy on radioactive minerals.
They did until 2013. The parliament lifted that ban by a very narrow margin because they were desperate for economic development. That's what gave ETM the green light to push forward.
But the locals in Narsak were terrified. I mean, blowing up a radioactive mountain next to your sheep pastures and drinking water.
Exactly. They saw it as the end of their traditional Inuit way of life. This sparked a massive grassroots movement called Uranium, led by local activists like Marianne Paviasen.
And it wasn't just a local protest, it turned into a national political earthquake.
Yeah.
By April 2021, it triggered a snap election.
It did. The Kvanefjeld mine became the single defining issue of the election, and the historically dominant pro-development party, Siumut, completely collapsed. They dropped to just 29% of the vote.
And the left-wing Environmental Party won.
Yes, the Inuit Ataqatigiit, or IA party, led by Mute B. Ejid, who was just 34 years old. They won 37% of the vote with one central promise: stop the Kvanefjeld mine.
I love the quote from election night. They asked him about the mine, and he just said 3 words: it won't happen.
And he didn't mess around. By late 2021, they passed Act Number 20, widely known as the Uranium Act. This law banned the exploitation of any minerals with a background uranium level above 100 parts per million.
And since Kvanefjeld sits at over 250 ppm, that law effectively killed the project overnight.
Completely killed it.
Which I want you listening to really imagine this. It's like holding a winning lottery ticket. The economic projection showed Greenland stood to gain $22.8 billion in tax and royalty revenues from that mine. If you do the math for 56,000 citizens, that is over $400,000 per person. And they chose to tear the ticket up to protect their water and sheep.
It's a profound calculation. How does a society weigh generational wealth against environmental preservation, especially when Greenland's ultimate political goal is full independence from Denmark?
Right, because to be independent, they need to replace the massive financial subsidies they get from Copenhagen. They need their own economy.
Exactly. This creates huge constitutional friction. Greenland controls its resources, but Denmark controls foreign policy and security. And uranium is a dual-use security material. So Greenland's environmental values directly clash with the only project big enough to buy their independence.
It's an incredible democratic victory for the environment. But as the source material shows, this immediately triggered one of the most complex, high-stakes corporate legal battles in the world. ETM didn't just walk away from $150 million.
No, they didn't. They claimed the Uranium Act was retroactive and constituted illegal expropriation of their asset. They argued it was a breach of contract.
Which makes sense from a corporate view. But the amount they are suing for is staggering. They're seeking $7.5 billion in primary damages, plus $4 billion in pre-award interest.
Totaling roughly $11.5 billion.
$11.5 billion. That is roughly 4 times the size of Greenland's entire annual GDP.
Yeah, if Greenland loses, it could instantly bankrupt the self-governing territory.
But wait, how does a mid-sized Australian mining company afford to fight an $11 billion lawsuit against a government? The legal fees alone would bankrupt them.
This brings us to a really controversial player, Burford Capital. They are one of the world's largest litigation finance firms.
Litigation finance.
Yeah.
They fund the lawsuit.
Yes. They pay all the upfront legal costs, the lawyers, the arbitration fees, and in exchange, if ETM wins or settles, Burford takes a massive cut of the payout.
So it's essentially a Wall Street firm placing a purely financial bet against a small, autonomous government.
Exactly. It fundamentally changes the dynamic. It's no longer just a dispute over a mine, it's an investment vehicle.
Hmm.
And funders like Burford are obligated to maximize returns for their shareholders, which often means pushing for massive damage awards instead of pragmatic settlements.
That feels incredibly dystopian. So ETM and Burford launched this dual-track legal strategy. They file for arbitration in Copenhagen against Greenland and Denmark, and they also file in Greenlandic domestic courts.
Right. And there was a massive ruling in October 2025 from the arbitral tribunal.
What do they decide?
Well, first, they ruled that the right to an exploitation license is not arbitrable. They said the specific issue must be decided by the local Greenlandic courts.
Okay, so a win for Greenland sovereignty.
Yes. And second, they completely dismissed the Danish state as a party to the case. Copenhagen is off the hook financially.
Wow, okay. But the threat of the $11.5 billion isn't gone, is it?
Not at all. The tribunal decided to stay or pause the arbitration regarding the breach of contract and financial damages. Basically, they're keeping that billion-dollar threat alive in the freezer, waiting to see what the local courts decide about the license.
That is a massive sword hanging over the island. And the optics of how ETM is fighting this are just brutal. They hired former Danish Foreign Minister Jeppe Kofod and former Ambassador Friis Arne Petersen to their advisory board.
Yeah, it raises severe ethical questions. You have former top-tier diplomats using the institutional knowledge and networks they acquired while serving the state and using them to help a corporation sue that exact same state.
It's the ultimate revolving door nightmare. It looks like a classic regulatory chill scenario. If a democracy passes a health or environmental law, they just get sued into oblivion by international capital.
And the implications are huge. If Greenland loses and goes bankrupt, their independence is crushed. But if ETM loses everything, it sends a message to global investors that Greenland is an unstable regulatory environment.
Right, when the West desperately needs companies to risk capital in the Arctic to beat China.
Exactly. It's a lose-lose situation for Western strategy right now.
Which leads us perfectly into our final segment, the Western response. With Kvanefjeld locked up in court, the U.S., the EU, and Denmark are scrambling. They need a backup plan. What are they doing?
Well, first, they're trying to advance alternative, non-radioactive projects. The biggest one is the Tambrise project. It's geographically close to Kvanefjeld, but the uranium levels are below that 100 ppm legal limit.
So it's legal to mine under the new Uranium Act.
Right. And crucially, Tambrise is moving forward under U.S. ownership.
Oh, wow. So that directly addresses the strategic autonomy issue.
Exactly. But they're also building legislative walls. Denmark passed an Investment Screening Act in 2021, and Greenland is proposing their own Foreign Direct Investment Screening Act.
To basically block Chinese state companies from buying ports or mines for security reasons.
Precisely. And the EU passed the Critical Raw Materials Act, designating 2 Greenland sites as strategic projects to fast-track them.
But the U.S. strategy is really aggressive. I saw the Atlantic Council propose this defend, deny, deepen, and develop strategy. The most fascinating part was under develop, recommending the use of the Defense Production Act, specifically Title III.
Yes, this is a major legal maneuver. Title III allows the U.S. government to designate a foreign project as a domestic source of supply for national security reasons.
So the U.S. could legally treat a mine in Greenland as if it were a mine in Nevada.
Exactly. And that allows the Pentagon to directly finance and de-risk these mining operations. It's the U.S. government stepping in as a venture capitalist to box out Chinese influence.
But the U.S. hasn't always been smooth about this. Like in 2020, they gave that $12.1 million aid package to Greenland.
Oh, yeah. For mining, tourism, and education, Washington thought it was a nice gesture.
But Copenhagen was outraged.
Oh, right. They were furious. They saw it as the U.S. trying to bypass the Danish government entirely. It just highlighted the central tension of resource nationalism here.
Yeah, the West is telling Greenland, hey, block Chinese investment for security reasons. But the West isn't writing the multi-billion-dollar checks needed to actually build these massive mines in the ice. Are they just asking Greenland to take the economic hit for our security?
That's the defining hypocrisy right now. You can't demand an emerging economy reject Chinese capital without offering a viable alternative.
So what's the solution? How do we fix this?
It has to be multilateral. The U.S. filling the new Arctic ambassador role is a start, but they need to coordinate with non-NATO allies who have capital and share these supply chain fears.
Like who?
Like Japan and South Korea. They are tech powerhouses, they need rare earths, and they have state-backed capital. If the U.S., Europe, Japan, and South Korea pool their resources, they can provide the ethical, transparent capital Greenland needs.
So Greenland gets its economy and path to independence without taking on debt from adversarial nations.
Exactly. It's the only way to balance security with Greenland's right to development.
Well, this brings us to an incredibly profound irony to close out our analysis today. When you look at the big picture, the global effort to save the climate through green technology, EVs, wind turbines, all of it is entirely dependent on tearing open some of the most fragile, pristine environments left on Earth.
It is a massive contradiction.
It really is. And it leaves you, the listener, with a tough question to ponder. Is it fundamentally possible to achieve global green energy independence without running roughshod over local indigenous rights and the local environment? Can we save the planet without destroying the very places that make it worth saving?
It's the defining question of our generation.
Thank you so much for joining us for this comprehensive geopolitical briefing. We hope it helped connect the dots between the EV in your driveway, the fighter jets in the sky, and the melting ice of the North. If you enjoyed this conversation, please hit follow on whatever app you're using right now, and kindly leave us a 5-star rating. It is the absolute best way to help expand the podcast's reach.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you on the next one.